You stand amid the ruins of a city that has forgotten how to breathe. The ground trembles not with cannon fire, but with silence, an unfamiliar, predatory kind of quiet. The smell of gunpowder lingers in the air, mixing with incense and ash, while the cries that once rose in prayer have fallen into an eerie stillness. You do not know yet that what comes after conquest will demand more courage than any battle. Before we step into this haunting silence, take a moment to look around our own world. This channel's community now spans every continent, from Istanbul to Sao Paulo, from Manila to Manchester. Each of you a witness to the echoes of the past. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe history is more than memory, join us by subscribing. Together, we keep these forgotten voices alive. When the final Ottoman cannon ceased its thunder on the morning of May 29, 1453, Constantinople no longer existed as an empire, but as a wound. The smoke that drifted over the Bosphorus carried with it the last breath of Byzantium. Soldiers poured through shattered gates, past the golden mosaics that still shimmered through soot, and found themselves among a people too stunned to resist. But what began as chaos soon transformed into order, the kind only an empire trained in conquest could impose. In the days that followed, witnesses spoke of a peculiar rhythm overtaking the city. Looting, then silence. Weeping, then commands barked in Turkish and Arabic, punctuated by the rustle of parchment. In one account preserved by a Venetian notary, an Ottoman officer carried a scroll longer than his arm, reading aloud names of households, those marked for execution, enslavement, or resettlement. It was not rage that filled the air, but the calm of administration. Even grief, it seemed, had been scheduled. Within Hagia Sophia, once the beating heart of Christian Rome, thousands of captives huddled beneath fractured domes. The great church had become a sorting ground. Women and children were separated from men, nobles from laborers, the devout from the defiant. According to one Greek priest who survived, they counted us like coins, and those whose value they deemed useful were taken aside. We were not punished, we were processed. Outside, the streets bore the weight of both victory and ritual. Ottoman scribes recorded property, livestock, and captives with the same meticulous care. The Sultan's commanders were not improvising. They were following orders drafted weeks before the siege began. These directives, preserved in fragments, described a procedure for what they called the securing of lineages. The phrase concealed something far darker than simple enslavement, for the Ottoman Empire understood conquest not as an ending, but as a conversion. Cities were bodies to be reanimated under new faith, new language, new memory. The first step in that transformation was silence, the kind that erases the old world before the new one speaks. On the third day after the fall, Sultan Mehmed II entered the city. He rode through the ruins in solemn triumph, his horse's hooves echoing off marble streets. Chronicles describe him dismounting at the doors of Hagia Sophia, gazing at the mosaics of Christ and Mary before ordering them veiled. Then, turning to his officers, he declared the city not conquered, but reborn. Constantinia, he said softly, is now under the shadow of God. The phrase carried both mercy and menace, yet even as the Sultan proclaimed renewal, the real work began far from his gaze. In quarters east of the Forum of Theodosius, Ottoman officials assembled the widows and wives of fallen Byzantine officers. The men were gone, slain or sold, but the empire saw use in those who remained. They were catalogued in ledgers as household assets of lineage value. Their names, titles, and family connections were cross-checked against noble registries. Many could not understand the language of their captors. They responded only to gestures, to the iron weight of a seal pressed into wax beside their names. One observer, a Genoese merchant named Carlo Rossi, wrote in his private journal, "I saw women led away not as spoils, but as vessels of remembrance. The soldiers did not gloat. They measured. It was conquest done with quills. Some were sent to provincial estates, others to Istanbul's nascent administrative households. Their children were taken separately, boys marked for the devshirme levy, girls distributed among households of ranking officials. The process unfolded with chilling efficiency. By the end of that week, Constantinople had been emptied of defiance but filled with paperwork. The survivors, however, remembered more than documents could contain. A nun named Theodora, found later in an Ottoman census under the name Fatma bint Yusuf, left behind a small piece of parchment hidden within a prayer book. It read, "We were told not to mourn too loudly, for sorrow is a form of resistance." Her words echo the empire's quietest victory, teaching the conquered to police their own grief. As days became weeks, the city transformed. Minarets rose beside broken churches. Markets reopened with traders from every corner of the empire. To the world beyond the walls, Constantinople seemed reborn, alive, prosperous, secure. But within the women's quarters of the old city, silence persisted. The same silence that had fallen when the cannons stopped, now institutionalized as obedience. Did the conquerors know what they were creating? Or did they believe they were saving souls while erasing identities? Ottoman records suggest both motives coexisted. In one surviving decree, a court secretary wrote, "Mercy is shown through transformation," a philosophy both humane and horrifying. By autumn, the smoke had cleared, and the empire had rewritten its newest subject city. The widows of Byzantium became invisible lines in tax registers, their children new servants of the Sultan. The empire's genius lay not merely in conquest, but in the art of forgetting, and in teaching the conquered to forget themselves. Yet, among the ruins, stories endured. In a cellar near the old Blachernae Palace, an anonymous voice carved into the wall a single sentence. "They did not kill us, but we are no longer alive." That line, fragile as dust, captures the essence of what came next, the shift from war to absorption, from sword to silence. For when an empire learns to weaponize grief, victory never ends. And somewhere beyond those newly risen minarets, another set of doors was opening, the first rooms of a system designed to erase memory itself. Beneath the polished marble floors of Topkapi Palace, where courtiers whispered beneath gilded ceilings, another empire was quietly being built. It had no armies, no cannons, no banners. Its soldiers were clerks and scribes, its battlefield parchment and ink. Here, amid the empire's vast machinery of governance, human identity itself became a resource to be processed, an invisible war waged not against bodies, but against memory. By the mid-16th century, the Ottoman bureaucracy had perfected a system of control that blurred the line between mercy and manipulation. Records from the imperial chancery, known as the Defterhane, read less like chronicles of conquest and more like manuals in psychological engineering. Columns of names filled the pages, each accompanied by a terse note: widowed, converted, resettled. No emotion, no history, only function. The empire, in its precision, had found a way to rewrite people as data. Among the most chilling of these records are the ledgers describing what administrators called family dissolutions. These were not chaotic raids, but carefully timed interventions, calibrated to the rhythm of mourning. Women whose husbands had fallen in battle were first sequestered in holding compounds, converted monasteries, garrison barracks, and, in some cases, confiscated noble estates. Their children were listed separately under the term kul yavrusu, offspring of service. Within days, most of the boys vanished into the devshirme system, the empire's infamous child levy. The devshirme was not merely a recruitment drive, it was an act of engineered amnesia. Every child was stripped of name, faith, and family, and given a new identity as a servant of the Sultan. "He was born again into obedience," wrote one administrator in a report to Constantinople. But the most devastating transformation was reserved for the mothers left behind. Ottoman officials, pragmatic and devout, viewed grief as both a liability and an opportunity. To the empire's mind, a mother severed from her child was clay, soft, malleable, ready to be reshaped into loyalty. One such case survives in fragmentary testimony preserved by a Venetian diplomat. It tells of Helena, the widow of a Byzantine officer captured near Trebizond. After her husband's death, she was transported to an estate outside Bursa, where she was given a new name, Hatis, and assigned to care for the children of Ottoman officers. For months she asked about her own son, a boy of 9 taken by soldiers during the siege. The steward's reply was always the same. The boy is with God's army. But one evening, a scribe, perhaps moved by pity, whispered to her, "He now wears the Sultan's crest. Forget his name, or it will destroy you." Helena's letters, written in secret on scraps of linen, describe a descent not into madness, but into numbness. "They tell me I must smile when I serve," she wrote. "So I have learned to smile until I no longer know when I began." In Istanbul's records, her story is reduced to a single line. Hatice bint Abdullah, loyal household worker, exemplary comportment. It was not a lie, but it was not the truth either. This was how the machinery worked, grinding human complexity into categories of usefulness. At the center of this system stood the imperial scribes, trained in a discipline known as kalemiye, the pen service. Their ink was iron gall, black as burnt silk. They wrote in silence, their only music the soft scratching of quills. To them, the transformation of captives was not cruelty but governance, a way to preserve order and faith across a sprawling empire. One clerk's notebook, discovered centuries later, contains a line scrawled between official entries. "Mercy requires the erasure of the past." Perhaps he believed it. Perhaps he wrote it to convince himself. And yet, beneath the serene surface of imperial order, resistance flickered. Some mothers refused to forget. In one Anatolian town, a group of widows began whispering forbidden lullabies in the night, using the melodies to encode names and memories. The authorities dismissed them as harmless superstition. But to those who listened, each song was a ledger of what had been lost, a counter-archive to the empire's own. Ottoman chroniclers later noted the phenomenon uneasily, calling it the Song of the Grieving Ones. It spread quietly from village to village like smoke through keyholes. The empire could not silence every voice, but it learned to anticipate them. Manuals for provincial governors, cold, procedural texts, advised that women recently bereaved should be offered new bonds of faith and marriage within 40 days, lest despair turn to sedition. The phrasing was clinical, yet it revealed a disturbing insight. The Ottomans understood that to govern souls, one must manage grief as carefully as taxes. Even conversion itself became part of this psychological calculus. In formal ceremonies, captives were bathed, dressed in white linen, and instructed to repeat the Shahada. Witnesses described the moment as both theatrical and bureaucratic. Those who hesitated were reassured, coaxed, and then renamed. For the empire, every conversion was a line of ink, a triumph of form over feeling. And yet, for the converted, it marked the slow unspooling of self. A priest who later escaped to Crete recalled seeing a woman faint as she uttered her new name, whispering in Greek as she fell, "Let God remember me, for I no longer can." What makes this machinery so haunting is not merely its cruelty, but its calmness. There was no hatred here, only process. Each decree justified itself as mercy, each policy cloaked in theology. The Ottomans did not destroy their enemies outright. They rewrote them. Faith was not forced but reframed, motherhood not honored but repurposed. Identity became both currency and weapon. By the late 16th century, even European observers, initially admiring of Ottoman efficiency, began to sense the deeper cost. One Habsburg envoy described visiting a captured Balkan town, where he found families living under Turkish names, speaking two languages but belonging to neither. "They have forgotten how to remember," he wrote, "and that is the Sultan's truest victory. The empire's archives would call it assimilation. Historians might call it survival. But to those who lived it, it was something more corrosive, a hollowing out of self so complete that even longing became suspect." For centuries afterward, travelers through Ottoman lands would hear faint songs in old dialects, lullabies without meaning, sung by women who no longer knew the word's origin. In that echo lies the heart of the Ottoman genius for control. Not through terror, but through tenderness warped into obedience. A conquest of the mind dressed in the garments of faith and care. And somewhere in a locked chest of the imperial archives, a note written by an unnamed scribe still waits. "Those who forget willingly are easiest to rule, but those who remember against their will, those are the dangerous ones." The wind that moves through the ruins of forgotten villages carries more than dust. It carries syllables half remembered, words that no longer belong to any single tongue. Across the Balkan mountains and the Anatolian plain, echoes linger in songs and children's games, remnants of an empire that conquered by silence. The Ottomans are long gone, yet their shadow speaks in the lullabies of mothers who never knew their own lineage, and in the faces of descendants who carry two histories behind one name. In 1882, a team of French archaeologists digging near the Black Sea uncovered a trove of small objects: wooden toys, rings, scraps of parchment inscribed in Greek and Ottoman Turkish. Each had been buried beneath a ruined home the villagers called the Mother's Floor. Local legend claimed it once sheltered women taken in conquest, those who refused to speak. The site told its own story. Toys for children taught new prayers, rings engraved with names never spoken again. Objects of the erased. Across centuries, this hybrid inheritance took root in the children of conquest. They were the first to speak the language of the empire but dream in the tongue of the defeated. Ottoman court records list them as sons of the faith. But in folk songs collected from Albania to Anatolia, they are called the shadow-born. One verse recorded in the early 20th century murmurs, "My mother's heart beats in another tongue, but her silence teaches me my name." These verses reveal a truth the empire never meant to leave behind, that assimilation does not erase memory, it buries it alive. The Devshirme boys, raised to serve as janissaries or scholars, left descendants who sometimes traced faint threads back to villages their grandmothers could no longer name. Centuries later, genetic studies found Balkan and Greek markers in families of Anatolian origin, evidence of a policy written into blood. But blood alone cannot tell the story. Memory endured in ritual, too subtle for archives. In the mountain villages of northern Macedonia, women still weave patterns of crosses and crescents together, motifs passed down without explanation. Asked their meaning, one elderly woman replied simply, "It keeps both gods awake." Her words were not rebellion, but inheritance, born of centuries when forgetting was survival. Historians call it cultural palimpsest, a text written, erased, and written again. But what remains beneath still shapes the surface. In Cretan kitchens, dishes blend spices from Istanbul with ingredients of the old Byzantine coast. In songs sung at Anatolian night markets, rhythms echo Slavic laments. These are not coincidences. They are fingerprints of the forgotten, the quiet proof that empire never truly ends, it only changes vocabulary. In 2022, archaeologists near Edirne unearthed another kind of evidence, a sealed chamber beneath an old administrative building. Inside were hundreds of tokens, lockets, cloths, and letters embroidered with both Christian and Muslim symbols. One letter, written in Ottoman script and archaic Greek, read, To my sons, who will never know I lived twice. The author remains unknown. Her words mirror the fate of thousands who survived conquest not by escaping it, but by inhabiting both worlds until the border between them dissolved. Even now, traces of that duality persist. In Turkey and the Balkans, families bear Turkish surnames with roots in older Greek or Slavic words. Oral histories tell of ancestors who prayed in two directions, toward Mecca and toward memory. Scholars debate whether these syncretisms are tolerance or trauma. Perhaps they are both. The empire's greatest legacy was its ability to make survival look like devotion. There are still villages where mothers sing to their children in dialects no one can translate. Linguists call them ghost languages, hybrids of Ottoman Turkish, Greek, and local tongues. But the villagers do not seek translation. They say the songs keep nightmares away. In one Bosnian Valley recording, a grandmother hums a tune without words. When asked its meaning, she replies, "It means we are still here." That phrase, simple, defiant, may be the most haunting echo of all. The empire's ghosts do not dwell in ruins or archives. They live in the quiet continuity of ordinary life. Every borrowed word, every blended recipe, every untranslatable melody is resistance disguised as inheritance. The Ottomans sought permanence through obedience, but what endured was the human will to remember in secret. Centuries after the cannons fell silent, the empire's true afterlife lies not in palaces that crumble or archives that burn. It lives in those who walk the line between memory and oblivion. The ghost children of the empire still sing, their voices soft but unbroken, reminding us that no system, however vast, can erase the instinct to remember.